Talk over drinks.
Talks over drinks. Talks over.
Okay, good day, good day. Welcome to the 2024-2025 season of Talks Over Drinks. This is season 7 for Markel and myself, so we're very excited. We're doing this a lot different. We were doing it in person, but because of work, we moved to a Zoom platform to continue the show for all of the folks that wrote in and called and texted and told us that they wanted us to return. So again, my name is Corey Folkenye. As always, my partner in justice, the guy, Markel Prines. Markel, what's going on, sir?
Everything's everything, brother. You know, I like to start off with that. We're seeing great things happening in the world, and we're just lucky to be a part of it.
I understand. Do you have a thought of the day for the viewers?
Yes. Thought of the day for the viewers. I actually touched on it earlier today about being self-reliant and basically being your own hero. I'm going to reiterate that in this show right here because I think that's one of the most important things that you can possibly do. Be your own hero, even though we have people in the world today that stand up to be leaders in our community, hopefully with the best intentions. They'll get the job done to our benefit. But if those individuals can't or do not do the proper job to serve us properly, we have to be our own hero. So that would be my food for action word of the day.
Copy that. Well, definitely appreciate that. And like I said, it's really good to be back. We're all excited. We're changing up the format a little, so we're going to introduce you to my brother of another color, Jeff Kleb, and he is live with us from Wiesbaden, Germany. Jeff?
Wiesbaden, yes. 30 minutes west of Frankfurt.
Okay, Jeff is our international correspondent that's joining us, so we're stepping our game up for 2024. Jeff is a good friend of mine. I'll let him introduce himself and how he came to be a part of the show. Jeff?
Well, my name is Jeff Kleb. I'm from Hanover County, Virginia, but I live in Wiesbaden, Germany. My wife got a job transfer over here. She's a civilian employee of the federal government of the United States. So we're over here. We're scheduled to be here till next summer. We could leave sooner, but it looks like we're going to be here till next summer. But anyway, we got here in 2022. It's a 6 hours difference, so it is dark here. I'm in our apartment over here. My philosophy is that believe half of what you see and none of what you hear. Every day presents a new challenge and a new opportunity, and yesterday is always in the past. And my quote of the day is, the older I get, the more talented I used to be. And I appreciate Corey for welcoming me into the fold. This is totally new for me, but I think it's a really cool idea. And it was nice to meet Markel, not even in person, but on video. So, and thank you, Mike Ter Maat, for spending your time with us this evening.
Yep. So we're gonna segue into Mike, and I'm gonna introduce him first. Mike Ter Maat is the Libertarian candidate or the Libertarian hopeful. He's running for president of the United States. He wants to represent the Libertarian Party as the presidential candidate. Mike, how are you today?
I'm doing good. It's a great pleasure to be with you guys. I am also in Virginia, but that is a complete coincidence. And Jeff, I'm sorry you're not in Virginia right now, but we look forward to seeing you when you're back in Hanover. Thanks for letting me spend time with you guys today.
It's a pleasure. And the one thing I definitely want to lead off, we're going to give you some freedom to do your thing. But the whole reason there is a Talks Over Drinks is because back in 2015, I had the pleasure and the opportunity of being a campaign manager for a Virginia State Senate candidate by the name of Carl Loser. And the name is spelled Loser. And that was my segue into the party. I originally was introduced by my attorney and brother in Christ, Sandy Sanders, introduced me to Robert Sarvis. And that's where I came into the party. And I was always welcomed with open arms in the Libertarian Party. And my confusion was always, where are the Blacks and Hispanics? And I spent a lot of time volunteering for different campaigns, both in Virginia and North Carolina. I learned that it was very difficult for Libertarian candidates to get favorable press. And after working the Loza campaign, Markel and I just launched Talks Over Drinks because we just wanted the opportunity to speak to people that didn't have a voice. So we're glad that you're here, Mike. Please tell the viewers a little bit about yourself and why you're being a presidential hopeful with the Libertarian Party.
You bet. Thank you for all of that. And I agree. Our party in general has not done a very good job of reaching out. To be fair, we don't do a very good job of reaching out to any group, really. And the fact that we have not done a very good job of reaching out to Blacks and Hispanics is just part and parcel of that. And it's a real shame, because I do believe that much of what the government has done in terms of public policy has been particularly bad for racial minorities and for immigrants in the United States. And so that I believe that we're really missing an opportunity for outreach there. So good for you for bringing it up. Look, I am in this campaign for, I think, a lot of reasons that we all understand. We understand the Libertarian Party has a big opportunity in 2024. And we understand why, right? If for no other reason, it bears repeating that the Republican Party and the Democratic Party are about to nominate individuals who are trying to be polite here. Let's go with problematic. Each of those individuals is problematic. I think that it also bears repeating that the Republican and Democratic parties have left behind the agenda that they once pursued. It used to be that the Republican Party would stand up for fiscal conservatism, would stand up for free markets, for free trade, for open trade. The Democratic Party would stand up for your First Amendment rights. You used to be able to find a Democrat or two who was anti-war. All of that has changed, right? All of that has gone by the wayside. And now we see the Republican Party and Democratic Party adopting as its number one priority keeping the other side out of power. And that is where authoritarianism grows in a democracy, when you have a politician standing up and saying, you really need to fear that other idiot coming to power, not the loss of your civil liberties. And if you give me more power and more authority, I'll be able to protect you. This is what it is that we're fighting in 2024, is this movement in an authoritarian direction based on our political duopoly in the United States. And I think that it bears repeating that this is not merely an opportunity for the Libertarian Party. This is an obligation. We have an obligation to get this right. If you're waiting for a Republican politician to lead the charge back toward, a constitution of the limited powers, I think you're, waiting for something that's just not going to happen. I think the same thing can be said for the Democratic Party's politicians. If you're waiting for them to right this ship in terms of spending, in terms of foreign policy, in terms of monetary policy, in terms of standing up for your civil liberties, in terms of standing up for a better set of policies at the local level, look, we've waited long enough. I would argue that you're waiting for something that's not going to happen if you're putting your eggs in the Democratic politician basket. And so I do believe it is up to us as libertarians. As libertarians, we are, after all, the philosophical descendants of the people that put together the Declaration of Independence, that wrote the Constitution, that put together our federal government, and did so for only one legitimate reason, and that's to protect our civil liberties, to protect our rights. There's no other reason why anyone sails across the North Atlantic in the 18th century. So it is up to us to recognize that that is a torch for us to pick up and to lead the charge. And I believe that to fulfill on that obligation, we need to do a couple of things as a party that we have not done very well in the past. We need to do some things differently from past presidential campaigns, from past national campaigns. And I would argue that those fall into two categories. Number one, we need to run a very principled campaign. We need to run on a platform that is very principles forward, that is based on starkly differentiating us from the Republican Party and from the Democratic Party, that lets people understand what libertarianism is all about, that we are a very, very different choice from the other parties, and that we represent Americans' values better than those other parties do. And so I believe that it is up to us to plant the flag of libertarianism in the ground very hard, raise that flag very high, and let people find us. I think that most Americans have a libertarian streak. They wouldn't call it a libertarian streak. Most Americans can't spell libertarianism, right? Most Americans have no idea the Libertarian Party exists. And those that do know it exists probably wouldn't be able to tell you what it's about. But it is true, I believe, that most Americans have values that led them to maybe join the Republican Party at some point in the past, or join the Democratic Party at some point in the past, or have led them to be just completely frustrated with the political process in America and not align themselves with either party, but have basic American values of fiscal conservatism and social liberalness that suggest to them that they are most at home in the Libertarian Party if we would present our case. And so I'm running on a platform of some of the most transformational ideas in libertarian thought. We call our platform the Gold New Deal, a new relationship between us and the government, especially the federal government, but also a new relationship between us and the state governments. And the second thing that I think that we need to do very differently, they need to do better than we have in the past as a party regarding our presidential campaigns, is that we need to run a very professional and a very credible campaign. It's the reason I've already put together a team of 20 professionals. It's the reason why anyone who's paid any attention to our social media, our print media, our websites, that we work very hard at protecting our credibility. It is true that we're running on extremely transformational ideas, but because of that, we believe that credibility is even more important than usual. And so we back up all of those ideas with detail, with plans, with an understanding of how to get things done. Credibility is also the reason why we lean very hard into my own personal background in public service and public policy. I've had 2 different careers in public service. I started out as an economist. I worked for the White House for a couple of years. I've worked for other government agencies. I spent about a decade in Washington working as an advocate for free markets, for less regulation, for greater competition. I spent another decade as an entrepreneur. A partner of mine and I launched a business providing strategic consulting to financial institutions and nonprofits and educational services for financial services executives. I've taught economics at 3 different universities. And as a second career, I worked from the age of 49 to 60 for 11 years as a police officer in Broward County in South Florida. I was on the road the entire time, 11 and a half years, as a registered libertarian. So as you might imagine, that led to some interesting conversations and even the occasional argument. It's the reason why I spend so much time talking about the need for profound, fundamental reform, change in the way that we manage police officers, in the way that we manage police agencies, the way that we manage our criminal justice system. We live under the world's most oppressive criminal justice system. I believe that we need to make changes, not only in terms of how we manage officers and agencies, but the laws that we ask law enforcement to enforce. We need to sunset the war on drugs. Most cops will tell you it doesn't work. I know firsthand it doesn't work. And so even if you didn't agree with us as libertarians on the ethics, just as an empirical matter, just objectively speaking, the war on drugs has been a colossal failure, and it's time for us to start treating medical issues for what they are. That's a little bit about, how I see it, where our campaign is going, and why we're in it. I hope that makes some sense.
So Jeff has spent time in the military, the Army, as well as being a Hanover County, Virginia deputy. And I know that you guys probably share a lot in common. Jeff, do you have a question you'd like to ask Mike?
Yeah, well, he brought up a very good point about, the problem with having laws against victimless crimes, an overly oppressive justice system, where many agencies worry more about getting a drug bust, a drug conviction, than they do about something like felony larceny, grand larceny, or something like that. The amount of time and effort it takes for a misdemeanor marijuana arrest, for the court, the law, and it's just, you kind of shrug your shoulders. You don't want to throw in the towel and say that, well, we should make crack cocaine legal, we should make heroin legal, but you realize we cannot arrest our way out of the situation. And that's not particular to any area. That's a nationwide problem. We have, our jails are overflowing with people in for victimless drug crimes, when then they're letting real bad people out early.
Right.
Robbers, rapists, muggers, car thieves, child molesters, and get let out early on parole, which makes society more violent.
Right.
And then you have the politicians keep passing more and more authoritarian laws, and then the police are charged with enforcing it. So you can't even get up out of bed and go to work every day without violating some kind of law, which increases the chance you're going to be in contact with a law enforcement officer, and a certain number of those are going to go bad. But I would like to ask Mike, I know he said about qualified immunity, removing qualified immunity, reforming law enforcement, and I understand the impetus behind that, but I know that law enforcement agencies are having a severe problem with recruiting, and that might make it worse. And I wanted to know what his take was on that. I don't know the answer to that, but it just seems to me like it's so hard to get people. And if you tell people they have to carry their own liability insurance, a lot of people are not going to want to become cops. And those who do, there's not going to be any more proactive policing. They're just going to wait until the thing happens, instead of trying to prevent crime or catch the bad guys in the act. They're going to just sit back and wait, and then come and clean things up later. Now, I could be wrong. That's just what came to my mind. And I'd like to hear what Mr. Ter Maat has to say about that.
Well, I think your concerns are quite valid. I think that most police officers recognize that there is some change that needs to take place in our industry. And these are cultural changes, right? And so by their nature, they take a long time. We're going in the right direction. I noticed even during the decade, which is a relatively brief period of time compared to the great span of history, just in the decade that I was on the road for 11 and a half years, I noticed there was change, not just in our agency for the better, but in other agencies in the surrounding area as well. Look, I think that a couple of things need to be said. You said a lot there, good for you, that need to be unpacked. One is, ultimately what we want is for the business of policing to look more like other businesses, to look more like other industries, which is to say, and by the way, the same thing for education at the primary and secondary level. A lot of what I'm going to say, you will recognize is extremely analogous to the situation of the changes that we need to make to how we manage schools and how we manage teachers. What we want is for an industry in which the best officers get paid more, mediocre officers get paid less, and crappy officers get fired. And that's not the way the system works today. And it doesn't work that way for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is the extraordinary power that unions have. Most people, not just police officers, but most people want to do a good job at work and want to be compensated for it. And I believe that over the long run, if we make the cultural changes necessary, it will actually contribute to the efficiency of recruiting for police officers. In other words, one of the problems we have is that we're trying to recruit into an industry in which we now say whether you do a good job or a crappy job, you're going to get paid the same. And that's actually that's a problem. You know, it may sound cute, but it's a problem in the sense that it's a business that gets a bad reputation for that reason. In many cases, it earns that bad reputation, right? Bad teachers and bad cops hang on. They don't typically get fired. It takes a long time to get rid of them, if that's possible ever at all. And that kind of thing really undermines not only the reputation, but also undermines the relationship between communities and schools, between communities and police agencies, because nobody wants to deal with an agency in which, the worst actors are just hanging on and not getting dismissed. That's a real problem. So look, the beauty of the idea of getting rid of qualified immunity, which, by the way, doesn't actually affect very many cases. It affects vanishingly few cases. The reason it's important is because the public believes it's important and because a lot of police officers think that it's important. The beauty of getting rid of qualified immunity and replacing it with a mandate to carry your own liability insurance, which, by the way, would make it look more like other businesses, would make it look like, that's how doctors operate, right? We don't give physicians immunity and say, don't bother carrying malpractice insurance. We recognize that they should carry malpractice insurance. The beauty of it is that it brings in an outside check on the system. It brings in an insurance company that's not going to put up with the BS that the unions put up, right? The unions make it so difficult for any information to come out. They make it so difficult to hold officers accountable. They make it impossible for differentiated pay. So by bringing in a private sector insurance company, you're bringing in an organization that is not going to just roll over when you say, we don't want to give you that information. They're going to demand everything that you can possibly imagine. They're going to demand everything from training records to performance reviews. They're going to demand historical records, and they're going to demand to, keep an eye on everyone going forward. And if you don't provide the information, you're not going to be able to afford the premium rates that come out of it. The premiums will drive up salaries, right? Salaries will come up to cover the extra cost of insurance premiums. That's just the way, markets work, is that to the extent to which you lay off the requirement that the city or the county or the state has to pick up the expense, those expenses getting picked up by an insurance company and get passed down, those savings at the employer level are going to have to get passed down to the officer level through salaries. Salaries will naturally come up. And so over the long run, the cost is really going to be a wash. The issue is, if you're bad at your job and you end up costing the insurance company money time and time again, you're going to get priced out of the market. Your insurance premiums are going to go up. And that's how we want the system to work, right? We want, people who are not good at performing surgery to get priced out. What we're not talking about is, shooting for some system where if you make an honest mistake at work on some random Tuesday, you're going to lose your house. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about carrying liability insurance. And to be honest, we all know how this is going to work. There would be unions providing access to liability insurance. An insurance agent is going to come sell insurance to all the officers as they become members of the team. And individual data is going to drive what happens to your individual insurance premium rate. And that's how we want the system to work. I think it's natural for officers to be worried, right? To be concerned. Any change, right? But especially a change that could be as important as what happens with a significant chunk of money. The other thing I think that needs to be said is that this idea that there should be some regime in place, a federal doctrine in the case of qualified immunity, that says that you can't seek redress in court if you feel like you've been wronged by an agency, by an officer. I find that sort of un-American. Now, you may have a good case, you may have a crappy case, but like anyone else who believes he has a case, you deserve a chance to have that adjudicated in court.
Right.
And I believe that that is how it should work, that we shouldn't have a system that shuts that down. Like I say, it's not what we do with doctors, and we're not talking about anything criminal. There is no protection for officers now for criminal liability, nor should there be, right? There's no protection for cops or anybody else. And we might argue actually that the courts protect officers too much in criminal court today, but it's a different issue. No one is trying to suggest we walk backwards on that. We need to do what we can to hold officers more accountable, not less accountable.
Okay. Markel, you have a question?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you once again for being with us.
Thank you.
You've given a lot of great information and a lot of your experience. It definitely leads to making this question that I have for you that much more important. Seeing as though you've been in different capacities, you've seen society from different roles. When I think about election season and even the course of a person's presidency or any form of government, I think of leadership. I think of leadership. I think of power and control and the different dynamics that involves. One thing that I often worry about when it comes to how we select and choose our leaders is the motivation for becoming a leader, the end goal of that particular leader. And the one question that I have for all leaders is, what is your definition of leadership? When does leadership start, and when should leadership actually fall back, take a back seat to a situation and let society as a whole not fully take control, but grab the reins and be able to be the deciding factor? Because a lot of times I hear leadership speak of tradition, societal norms, how they see their vision for what the country should look like. And a lot of times, everybody, most times, we're all not going to agree on what the country should look like. But I see one of the struggling factors that we have is when leadership doesn't understand the role of leadership. They don't know when leadership starts and when to actually fall back as a leader and let society actually do what it needs to get done. So I guess that would be my question for you. When does leadership start, and when should leadership actually fall back? Where does it have its place where society is, I would say, a level of trust, is given a level of trust from our leadership to do the right things?
Markel, you have put your finger on the most important thing in all of political thought, in my view. And no one has ever asked me this the way that you have. You make me cry. What I wanted to do before you asked this question is come back to what you said before we started, which is a combination of independence, right, and understanding our own role in the world. Let me level set here for a minute about how I see the world, because it affects, I think, how we define leadership. I think it's important that we recognize that each one of us, first of all, our rights are inalienable, but given to us by a higher authority. They do not come from the government. And as a matter, whether you believe that that is a matter of natural rights or a matter of faith, as I do, having grown up in a faith tradition, I believe that that means something that we don't talk about too often, but needs to be said today. And that is that it is not merely your right to live your life by your own standards. It is your obligation. You have an obligation to live your life the way that you see fit. You do not have the right to sit back and let someone else live your life for you. That is not the way that we were designed, right? We are not on this earth to allow someone else to make decisions for us. And I think that this is an important conversation. I have lots of arguments inside my own family, of course, because, you know, I was raised Lutheran and a lot of my family are Calvinists. And, you know, we always talk about free will and the role that free will plays. But however you feel about free will, I do not believe it is up to us to say free will is an illusion and therefore I'm going to punt and allow someone else to make decisions for me. I believe it is our obligation to lead to seek our own path, to find whatever way was meant for us, even if it means you need to invent it every damn day, one step at a time. And this matters with regard to our definition of what kind of relationship that we want with our government. I spent a lot of time talking about how bad socialism is, right? But what I want to say is that it's not enough. I grew up as an economist. I grew up in banking, and you know, I spent a lot of time learning that our economy doesn't work very well when the government intervenes and makes decisions for us. But it's not enough to say that the government doesn't do a very good job of processing all of that information and making decisions for us. You need to go the extra step, and that is the following. Even if the government were able to make better decisions for you, let's imagine that all of the great free market philosophers and economists were wrong, and that socialism worked. This is a thought experiment. Okay. Imagine that the government could actually make decisions for you better than you could yourself. Would the government have the moral authority to go ahead and make those decisions for you? And I think that we need to answer that. No, it does not.
Right.
It is up to us to lead our lives not only by our own standards, but to decide on our own what those standards are. We do not make the contribution that is expected of us by our society, by our own free will, by our God. We are not making the contribution expected of us if we defer to someone else making decisions for us. It is up to us to use our creativity and plow ahead and try to figure out this life. If you're not trying a new path and pursuing someone else's path, then you're not breaking new ground. You're not making the contribution to our society that you should be. So having said that as background, I do not really view politicians as being leaders.
Wow.
Politicians' jobs are not to, at least they shouldn't be, right?
Right.
They're not to change our culture. Now, changing our culture may be important. Those are important things for us to do as humans. If you believe that our culture is going in a bad direction, then you should be engaged in that debate, in that fight. You know, go fight for what principles motivate you. You know, fight for the way you believe that our world should go. But to your point, you are right that we should not be trying to agree on what the norm is and then take public policy and push everyone toward the norm and use our leaders to try to funnel us into some sort of normality. That can't be the way this is going to work. And even if you believe that our culture is going in a bad direction, I don't like using public policy to do that. So, for example, well, we can talk about drugs, right? Now, maybe you and I agree that a lot of drugs are bad for you, and we don't even have to agree. But let's say we agreed on this. Let's say that the four of us agreed that a lot of drugs are bad for you.
Okay.
That doesn't mean that does not imply that you should be using public policy to make your argument to the rest of your neighbors, to your fellow Americans. You should be making that argument on your own. You need to do the heavy lifting. To me, it's an easy way out to try to pass a law, right, to get you what you want in our culture. You need to fight that battle upstream. You know, we say that culture is upstream from public policy. I don't like criminalizing things that you don't like because you believe that our culture needs to change. Even if you're right about the culture, right? You know, we should all be nicer to each other. You're going to pass a law that says we should be nicer to each other? That's the most ridiculous example, maybe, but you get my point. And you know, this happens even in areas where, look, I'm not going to be able to hide how I feel about abortion, right? You know, personally, I've got a big problem with it. But I recognize that I need to participate in the cultural discussion to get my ideas spread, rather than go to my legislature and say, you've got to make all abortion illegal because I don't like it. That's not going to carry the water that I believe needs to be carried. And I recognize abortion is a much trickier issue because there's the trade-off between, you know, the rights of the mother and the rights of the child. So I get that. I don't mean to oversimplify.
Right.
But I think you get my point, is that just because you don't like drugs doesn't give you the right to use the apparatus of the government, right, to fight that cultural battle. And so the answer, I believe, to where leadership needs to stop and start, I believe that cultural leadership needs to stop at public policy, and governmental leadership, which those aren't even words that go together for me, but government officials, politicians, have no business trying to show leadership in our culture. I won't stand for it.
Wow.
And they try too often, but I don't like it. A government official's job is to execute on what it is that we want to have done. And the legislature's job is to interpret, you know, what it is that needs to be executed. I get that. But we do not want a White House or a governor, right, telling us how to live our lives. That's not leadership. That's just being obnoxious.
I know that Jeff and I have had a lot of conversations, and Markel as well, about ballot access. And just in my time as a libertarian working for campaigns, Markel was there with me when I ran for state senate against Jennifer McClellan in 2017. Jeff, before we ask Mike, just to kind of segue, can you explain to our viewers about the issues that third parties have with the system of ballot access?
Well,
it's hell.
yes. There's some issues where, you know, with getting signatures, and then you go through the legwork, you get the, now this does vary by state, but you go through and you get all the signatures, you get the Libertarian Party or the Green Party or whatever alternative party on the on the ballot, but then you have to do it all over again the next election. But the Republicans and Democrats get automatic ballot access for their candidates. An issue that is also very large and significant to me is inclusion in the debates.
Correct.
I found it frustrating that people, you could, like Gary Johnson in 2016, in 2012 as well. When he ran for president in 2012, he should have been on that stage with Mitt Romney and with Barack Obama. And then in 2016, he should have been on that stage with Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump and even Jill Stein. Now, I think the Green Party, most of those people seem to be nuttier than a squirrel turd, but they deserve, if they are on enough ballots in enough states to theoretically garner 270 electoral votes, they deserve to have their voices heard. And Joe Jorgensen in 2020 should have been invited to participate in the debate with Trump and Biden. And it gets a chicken or the egg scenario where, well, we're not going to let the libertarians participate until they get above 10 or 15% approval in the polls, but they're never going to get up there if they're not included in the debate. If you included a libertarian or a Green Party candidate in the debate and they were allowed to participate, their percentages of people who would support them would go up rapidly.
Yes, sir. What are your thoughts, Mike, on ballot access and being included on the debate stage on a national level?
Yeah, I think this is the fight of the century, really. This is where it all happens. It is an uphill battle. I've run for Congress myself in Florida, and the number of signatures required was just astronomical. We ended up paying the fee, which was thousands of dollars. And, a lot of people wouldn't be able to come up with that fee. It probably wasn't a smart decision for me to come up with that fee.
Right.
It's absolutely insane. And maybe insane isn't the right word in the sense that they know what they're doing, right? The Republicans and Democrats are in on this together. They are rationally trying to keep anybody else out from competing with them. And I truly believe that if you were to leave it up to Democrats alone, they'd find a way to make sure Republicans weren't on the ballot and vice versa. Right. It's not like they love each other. They're just trying to narrow it down as far as they possibly can. So look, obviously these laws need to be changed. Obviously, we are making slight progress, but ultimately, we are going to need to get onto a national platform and raise these issues so that Americans can pressure their legislatures into doing the right thing. That is a heavy lift. In this particular presidential cycle, I don't think there's even going to be a debate, which is really unfortunate. But again, I probably shouldn't use the word insane. If you were advising Joe Biden, would you tell that guy to get into a debate with Donald Trump, with Mike Ter Maat?
Not at
Jill
all.
Stein?
So at this particular point, I had taken the liberty to reach out to the debate commission, and I sent them an email on behalf of Talks Over Drinks, and I told them that since they claimed that there was going to be a debate at Virginia State University in Petersburg, both my son and my stepdaughter went to Virginia State. Everybody in my family has attended a historically Black college. I told them that we want to be present. So they told me when I need to apply for my ticket. So we will keep the viewers posted on if Markel and I, and if Jeff is home by then, God willing, if we can show up at the debate and we can try to see if we can ask some questions, because that would probably be the number one question that I would ask in support of what Jeff said and what you just outlined, Mike. The only way third party is going to be heard is if we make a voice on that national stage. And like I said, Talks Over Drinks would not have been thought of unless I had worked with the Libertarian Party. And I feel that the mainstream media unfairly freezes out the independent perspective. And you have to get to the table to discuss things. And like you said, Mike, we may not all agree on things, but the conversation needs to be developed and, had. We need to talk.
Yeah. Well, you're exactly right, and that's well said. It is truly a mess, and I like the fact that you put your finger on that. It's not just the parties, but the media, right? The media has aligned itself with the parties.
Right.
You got your MSNBC and Fox and CNN. They've all aligned one way or another, and most podcasts do as well. But with the big mainstream media outlets, and now increasingly even with the big podcasters, they de facto, if not explicitly, align themselves with certain parties. I do believe that the new media is more open to the idea, if not the legacy parties themselves. The new media are more open to the idea of pushing for greater access from third parties. To your point, Corey, if you listen to the mainstream, if you listen to the cable news people, they will refer. Actually, most everyone in the media does this. They will refer to the concept of third party, right? They will say things like Americans are more open than ever before to the idea of third party candidates, but they won't mention the third party, right? They will never say the Libertarian Party because they don't want to give any traction whatsoever to anything but the Republicans or the Democrats. They'll just speak of it, obliquely, like, a third party candidate. And they'll mention Robert Kennedy as infrequently as possible. But if they mention anyone, it's him, and they won't mention anybody else. So.
I don't even feel that Robert Kennedy is getting the type of press that he needs to get. I've read a lot of newspaper articles on him. I've been to his website. There are some libertarians that I know that have been helping him with ballot access because he needs to get on the ballot. I personally think he should have ran as a Democrat, and he should have, I don't know. I just kind of feel like he may have gotten a little bit more traction. Clearly, he would be a better Democratic candidate than Joe Biden.
Absolutely. I do think it's a mistake. I think that when you look back on this year, I believe his team will eventually recognize that they should have run on the Democratic ticket. It's hard when there's an incumbent president, right? And you're in the same party. I get that. It's hard. But, where was he 4 years ago, and where will he be 4 years from now? It's not my fault that he decided to run at this particular moment and he's got an incumbent. He should be running against the incumbent, and then he should be running against the incumbent 4 years from now in his party, because after all, he is a Democrat.
Right. Markel, question?
I think you've answered every question that I've had. I had just that one, but with everything you said, you've encompassed a lot of great information. From my standpoint, I always have to reiterate that from an entrepreneurial standpoint, I always look for the signs of the leadership, just for lack of better word, that's going to allow us as entrepreneurs and as people that want to grow and contribute to society in a positive way. Just looking forward to those people that will allow us to have the freedom to do just that. So,
well, that's a really interesting point, because there are any number of ways in which our government makes it hard on people like you. You are not the obvious cup of tea of the federal government, right?
Yep, absolutely.
And it's really a shame, because I do believe that entrepreneurialism is the backbone of the economy's future. It may not be the backbone of the economy's present day, right, but that is indeed where growth comes from, and creativity. And I believe that when the government overregulates, as ours has for generations and generations now, we give up on creativity and growth in our economy that is unseen, right? you never know what the economy might have looked like had the government stood down. And
Right.
this is a real hidden cost that I think is very difficult for most Americans to appreciate. If you were to look at the difference between the United States economy and many other, democratic, allegedly capitalistic societies around the world, you will see that we are more dynamic. We have a higher standard of living, higher growth, higher income, greater accumulation of capital, greater direct capital investment from the rest of the world. We have a better economy. I get all that. And that's even though the federal government does, 1,000 stupid things a day. The difference between how much better our economy works and other democratic, capitalistic societies around the world, that difference is approximately the difference between the way our economy works and how it could work.
Right.
If the government were to get out of the way. And that's a pretty big gap. That's pretty significant. That's significant stuff. Imagine if the government got out of the way of nuclear energy production. If it would allow states to decide how to issue permitting for the development of new nuclear energy reactor power plant. Imagine those changes. Imagine if the federal government got out of the way of regulating financial institutions. Imagine if the government got out of the way of mandating the way that primary and secondary education should look, if it got out of the business of controlling commerce, regulating financial institutions, if it got out of social media. These are huge, huge applications of government overreach, and our society would be stronger for it if we can get the government out of the way.
I think people are, misinformed. I think that's the word that I would use as I talk to Jeff a lot and even Markel about, I guess they feel protected because the government is supposedly standing up for them.
Yeah.
And, the more you kind of study and research and look, Markel has his own business. Me and my spouse, we're contractors and we started our own business dealing with the federal government, motor carrier, Department of Transportation, dealing with the Commonwealth of Virginia. Like, it's a nightmare. It's a nightmare. You all almost have to hire an expert to help you circumnavigate the waters. It's like, I'm a truck driver. I just want to drive the truck. I don't want to have to do all that back office stuff. And I think working with Markel and, Jeff being my mentor, as he's driven a lot longer than I have, you kind of got to be a subject matter expert in a whole bunch of different areas that you may or may not want to deal with. I did my financials for last year. Definitely don't want to do that. So I definitely want to find somebody to do that. The one question I have for you is about immigration. And I say this, Markel and I are both from New York. Jeff and I talk a lot. My family, my dad's side of the family came from Trinidad and the West Indies. So I definitely know that a lot of my family members had to come to the United States and they had to become citizens. And living in a West Indian community in New York growing up, I saw the difficulties and the length of time it took people to become citizens. Fast track to what we have going on now, as I have a friend in New York named Eric, and I spoke to him yesterday. He works for sanitation in New York. And he just says, Corey, we'll just change the name. We'll just call it Crazy Town. And all of the things that he sees along his garbage route going through Queens. What's your perspective on how immigration is broken and what type of ideas would you bring to the table in order to try to right the ship?
Yeah, I appreciate all that. Look, a couple things need to be said simultaneously. Number one, legal immigration is good for the United States. Number two, illegal immigration is bad for the United States. And the reason I say that legal immigration is good for the United States is because I think that we have recognized over the generations that our American culture is inextricably tied to immigration. It's one of those things that defines us, that differentiates us from other democracies around the world.
Right.
It is the reason that we are traditionally a tolerant society. It is a society that has different components and we all have to learn to get along. That changes your culture. That is an important element of what it means to be an American, is learning to deal with a society that brings lots of people in from all over the world with different ideas, whether it's different ideas in terms of culture or faith or anything else. Legal immigration is also good for us economically. It's good for us financially, even at the governmental level, as long as you don't do something stupid like give away free checks, which a lot of our government agencies are trying to do lately.
Absolutely.
If you can stop that silliness, you would see that bringing people into the United States is good for our balance of payments. It's good for us financially, and it's good for us economically. Where we go wrong is by allowing illegal immigration to take place at such a huge pace. And I believe that we need to get control of our border to discourage illegal immigration, and we need to get faster at vetting people across the border legally, also to discourage illegal immigration. Most people who come into the United States come in illegally. And most people who come in illegally come with some form of human trafficking. They come from, the Mexican side with a gang or with a coyote, and they're handed over to one of these people working with a telephone-based app on the American side whom they don't know. And in all too many cases, this is how people wind up being effectively sold into indentured servitude. This is hell on earth. This is a human trafficking crisis of epic proportion. I spent a couple of days at the border a year ago. I talked to the sheriff's office, Customs and Border Patrol. I talked to ranchers with property on the border and a lot of libertarian thought leaders in the area. And I came away really shocked by the extent to which human trafficking is going on, and we are doing nothing to stop it. We have created a black market down there.
Right.
Black markets are dangerous. Black markets kill, whether it's in drugs or immigration or anything else.
Right.
We've created a situation where we make it illegal, but we don't stop it. So people come into the United States in a very, very dangerous fashion through human trafficking that we need to shut down completely. And people come into the United States without the right to work, which I believe is backwards. I believe that we need to get people in the United States and get them to work right away. When people come in without the right to work, we know that they're going to work anyway.
Right.
This is what leads, in all too many cases, to corporations taking advantage of them,
Right.
giving them very low wages because they're not allowed to compete in the economy in any real fashion. They're not allowed to seek whatever kind of employment they can. So they end up working for extremely small wages. This is what undermines the entire wage structure for our whole economy. This is the reason why there's downward pressure on our wages.
Right.
This is bad for people born in the United States who are trying to make a good wage. It undermines all of that because you've got this huge pool of people who are forced to work in the shadows of the labor market. We can't have it.
Right.
I would be more comfortable with a policy that said, when you come in legally, I'm going to call you in 6 weeks and make sure you have a job. That would be a better policy than saying you can't work, right? Is one that says you have to work. And by the way, this idea of saying you can't work, I mean, who is it we're recruiting? Like, we're in the business now of recruiting people that don't want to work. That doesn't make any sense. First of all, the vast majority of people that want to come to the United States want to work.
Right.
But what kind of signal are you sending when you say, we don't want you to work right away, but we are willing to pay out free money? And this is completely backwards. We should be doing neither one of those things. And so I believe the answer is getting control of the border, shutting down illegal immigration, speeding up legal immigration. This idea that it should take weeks and months and years is dopey. It's just stupid. It's not true. If you're not on a list, the presumption should be that we want to get you into the United States. And I recognize that means deploying certain technologies that we have not used up until now, but we need to interface with other nations' databases. Yes, if you're, wanted on a felony warrant, that's one thing. But if there's no reason to believe that there's something wrong, then we should be vetting you into the United States. And I recognize that most Americans want there to be some vetting, right?
Right.
I believe in greater immigration. We should be bringing people in faster. But the American public expects there to be some vetting at the border. And so we need to do that.
Right. Jeff, any questions?
Do you favor a merit-based immigration system where you have some kind of skill, or you can support yourself without becoming a ward of the state? The old Milton Friedman axiom about how you cannot have both an open border and a welfare state. I believe that to be true. And I know that, yes, people do want to come to work, but we have a heck of a lot of people who end up coming into our country. And if you look at New York, Boston, what happened in Martha's Vineyard, what's happening in Denver, you've got hordes and hordes and hordes of people coming, and they're being given cell phones, clothing, they're given places to stay, they're getting food, they're getting debit cards and things like that. That is something that the restrictionists, or whatever you want to call them, the anti-immigration people are going to point to that and say, hey, look, we've got, homeless veterans eating out of dumpsters. And then, here come these people streaming into the country with, new clothing, new backpacks, phone cards, cell phones. They're using an app. That's kind of going to be a tough sell from a libertarian standpoint. And I think you have a situation where we're importing large numbers of people on the verge of a potential economic downturn. Now you're going to have American citizens and legal aliens who are now going to be competing for jobs with newcomers, if that's the right word to use. It's going to drive down wages, and you're going to have U.S. citizens who now are going to be more likely to end up having to rely on taxpayer-funded public assistance of some kind. Then their kids have to go to school. That falls on the burden of local taxpayers. There's a lot of secondary and tertiary things that nobody really wants to talk about without being called xenophobic or racist or what. And it has nothing to do with what anybody's color is, because Americans are of all colors. But I just think that there's a lot of things that people don't want to discuss. You have some people who say, well, let's just open up it to everybody and have totally open borders. But, an open border between the U.S. and Mexico is not the same as an open border between Germany and Austria, or Belgium and the Netherlands, or Norway and Sweden. You have to have economic, social, and cultural parity for that system to work. Otherwise, it'll just collapse and you'll be overrun. I'm sorry, that was a lot, but.
Well, no, I mean, good for you. I agree with absolutely everything that you said there. I think that Milton Friedman was right. You can have open borders or a welfare system, but not both. And we need to get rid of the welfare system. I'm not advocating a completely open border. I do believe that we should have vetting. And yeah, I do recognize that there can be a speed element, right? The rate at which immigration takes place may have to be controlled. But I believe that our biggest problem with the way that we manage immigration today, in terms of the way we get people across, besides the fact that we don't let them work, we do it too slowly in terms of the vetting process. Our biggest problem is the welfare system. and then, of course, directing these people to certain geographic areas where we concentrate them, that's a stupid idea. And so we need to get out of the business of deciding for them where we want them to go, and we need to get out of the business of giving away free money. I'm not a big fan of deciding you're okay based on, your skill level, and this other person is not okay. And the reason for that is because we traditionally have not done a good job of that. The data show that a whole lot of people come in because they got a particular skill, but within a certain number of years, that skill is no longer the one that's needed, or no longer the one that individual has in terms of keeping up. And so it just doesn't, as a practical matter, it doesn't work as well as we wish it would. But the other thing that needs to be said is we wouldn't have such a problem in the bottom rungs of the socioeconomic ladder if it weren't for giving away the free money. We need to get folks to work right away, but we need to give them the right to work and compete for a decent wage rather than putting them in a situation where they have to take $6 an hour because it's illegal for them to work. So I think that there's things that we need to do to fix the system. And I agree with you. What we see in the cities these days, in New York City in particular, of course, but in a lot of other places as well, it's awful. It is awful. We have an obligation to do right by our veterans. That obligation does not extend to everybody else just because we have bleeding hearts. It does not extend to, all immigrants just because, we let people come in the United States doesn't mean that all of a sudden you need to give money to them. So I agree that this whole idea that veterans should be on the street when we're paying for housing for someone else who's new to America, not only is that bass backwards, but that's offensive to our principles. And it is illustrative of the problem. No one is saying, that particular dollar was one that should have been spent in a different way. But what we are saying is when you see these examples so starkly laid out side by side, it really illustrates what I think is an attitude adjustment that we have coming. We need to stop giving away the free money to immigrant populations. That's all there is to it.
On that note, as a member of the Libertarian Party, I was a member for 25 years. I now describe myself as a libertarian-ish independent, but nevertheless, there's a bad perception among a lot of people who have some libertarian beliefs that libertarians only care about foreign migrants more than they care about American citizens. That's a very hard perception to articulate your way around it. And you also have Democrat politicians who have publicly said that they want illegal migrants living in their district because it gives them more seats in Congress. There's probably 10 to 15 seats that are Democrat because of the way the census enumerates the population. And I don't know, it was a woman, I don't remember her name, but she was saying that she wants migrants in her district because they get more money from the federal government for projects that she can spend in her district. And it also increases the representation of her party in Congress. She said that publicly. And I think it's hard, if you're a libertarian, you believe in not having the welfare state, which I get that, but how can you diminish the welfare state when you keep bringing more people in who are going to be potential clients for it, and you have politicians who are encouraging the growth of the welfare state? That's a tough nut to crack.
It is a tough nut to crack. And there's nothing I'm going to be able to say that anyone is going to be able to claim, that's the wrench that's going to turn it. This is, politically speaking, this is going to be quite a lift. Yeah. And, for my way of thinking, I think that we need to do two things at once, and that is look at it from the top down and look at it from the bottom up. From the top down, I I was an economist with the White House. I used to work on the Office of Management and Budget. We used to have in those days what we called budget control law. Not so much these days, right? The idea was to make it difficult for the legislature to spend too much money. You're never going to be able to make it impossible. Any law that you pass by humans, right? Humans are going to be able
that shark.
to work. Yeah, exactly. But it did work to a certain extent for a relatively brief period of time. But having said that, whether it's a constitutional amendment or whether it's federal legislation or whether it's a libertarian-minded executive in the White House, one way or another, we need to cap federal spending. And I was really pleased to hear you mention Milton Friedman, because he is, of course, the one who taught us, most effectively anyway, that it's not merely taxation that's theft, but all government spending is theft, whether it's financed through taxation, whether it's financed through inflation, or whether it's financed by issuing debt and passing it down to future generations.
Amen.
All government spending is, a dollar spent that has to be taken from you one way or another that you are not going to be able to spend yourself. We need to cap government spending, and I do believe that capping it at the federal level would create pressure on welfare programs that are, after all, entitlements, broadly speaking, are the big bulk of what it is that's causing the acceleration in government spending. And so if you had an overall cap, I think that you might get the political cover that some legislators need to be able to say, well, we're going to have to tighten our belt all across, even if politicians don't have the guts to pass laws going after entitlements in particular. If you were to cap spending in the aggregate, that might give you the political cover necessary. From the bottom up, I think it has to be said that, if you are not a professional economist before becoming a cop will turn you into an economist, because you see the effects of bad public policy up close and personal. You see the effects of bad schools. And the problem with schools is not because, there aren't millions of teachers who are well-meaning and hardworking. The problem is that you've set up a monopoly and you lock out good ideas. You've precluded competition for the best teachers. You've allowed unions to, just like in the case of police officers, requirements for everyone to get paid the same amount, whether you're doing a good job or a bad job. There's no competition among the institutions to present to the parents making these choices. It's just a crappy setup all the way around. You've got not only bad education policies, but you have, as we discussed earlier, what I truly believe is the world's most oppressive criminal justice system that interrupts not only individuals' lives, but whole family units, and of course, disrupts the development of our entire culture in many places around the United States. We have bad housing policies, we have bad zoning policies, we have bad welfare policies, and all of these contribute to undermining, most especially, the bottom rungs on the socioeconomic ladder. The whole idea of this problem that we have in the United States, this real persistent intergenerational poverty that you see, poverty being passed down from one generation to the next, that is a political phenomenon. That is not something that would be predicted in a free market society. This is the result of bad public policy. This is not something that you would see 80 years ago. This is something that is the result of bad public policy. And I think that we need to make the case, and I do believe many Americans are waking up to the idea that a lot of our problems are the result of bad public policy. We need to make the case that at the local level, what we're seeing, many of the problems that we care about most on a cultural level, are the result of too much government intervention. And I think that if you make that case from the bottom up, and at the same time make the case from the top down that our government spends too much money, eventually you might get, some philosophical purchase from Americans who are trying to pay attention. None of that is to say, Jeff, that that you're wrong about this being a tough nut to crack, because it absolutely is.
I'm glad you didn't say from the middle out, but let me ask you two quick questions. Assuming there would be a President Ter Maat in the White House, my first question is, how do you deal with Republicans who want to ignore a bunch of problems and then Democrats who just want to throw money at it? My second question is, do you support any type of convention of states effort under Article 5 of the Constitution to forcibly put Uncle Sam back within constitutional parameters?
Yeah, let's work backwards. For background, as a libertarian, I'm not a big fan of term limits, right? Because I believe that you should have the right to vote for whatever idiot you want to vote for. But I think I have to admit that term limits are a bad idea whose time has come.
Wow.
Because the bias, the corruption of the power of incumbency suggests that it's hard to run a democracy, a democratic republic, without term limits. And I would say the same thing in reverse about an Article 5 convention. That it is a good idea whose time has not yet come. And what I mean by that is, it still scares the bejesus out of me. We do need to fight our way back toward a government of delimited powers. But I worry very much, and by the way, none of this is to say that I disagree with those who want such a convention, right? I mean, a good 49% of me is willing to fight for that convention. But 51% of me says, do you really want to open that door? Because if you open that door, there's a whole lot of statists that want to run through that door and use that convention for a much more muscular and proactive government.
Well, I wasn't referring to a constitutional convention. I was referring to a limited convention of states. They're two entirely different things, like the issue of term limits or a balanced budget or repealing the 17th Amendment and getting rid of elected senators, which I think was the biggest mistake we ever made outside of prohibition. But
I agree. And that is the way to manage it. But I don't think, ultimately, I don't think it is two different things. Because when Jeff and Mike decide this is what the agenda is going to be for that meeting, 3 Democrats show up and outvote us, and now the agenda is, what are we going to do about climate change? That's what I worry about, is that you and I set up a meeting to talk about capping spending and term limits, and a bunch of, my sister and her friends show up and they want to talk about how we're going to correct social media and how we're going to mediate against the effects of climate change. And all of a sudden we're saying, no, that's not the agenda. And they're saying, well, it is now.
Yeah. Wow.
I know.
Any other questions, Markel?
No questions. Just a simple statement to kind of close us out. Just going back to the thought of how when you're in different rooms, in different circles, sometimes people look at the glass, so to speak, as half empty or half full.
Right.
And a lot of times when we think about spending and government spending and overspending and things like that, we think about capping the government spending and how they need to learn how to budget better. And I think about in my inner circles of people that I speak with entrepreneurs, it's a different kind of talk. if someone in our circle says something about budgeting, we say, you don't have a budget problem, you have an income problem.
No.
That's a budget wouldn't matter if you had enough income. And I think about that as when we think about building communities and growth and development. And I've never studied economics besides my one semester in high school, probably that one semester that they give you where they think they're really teaching you something. But the one thing that I could say that I got out of it is, if you have one glass and you fill that glass up, it's full. There's nothing else that you can put in there. So what you need to do is get you another glass. Start filling that glass up. So I think about communities, and Corey knows this, and a lot of people probably know this about me, or don't know this about me. One of my favorite shows is actually Little House on the Prairie. I probably watch that show every day, seen every episode how many times. But just thinking about how to start off in a small town like that and to grow out, you have your church, you have your doctor, you have your lumber yard. There was plenty of situations in the storyline where the town had to grow.
Right.
But they couldn't grow necessarily within their community. They had to expand out. You had Charles, he went to the big city. He had to bring some income back from the big city to the small town. So we have to reach out. And a lot of times we get stuck in the thought of our small community, our neighborhood, and out of this state and that state, one state competing against the other state. And we think about our country as just being one pot where we're trying to circulate the dollar within our one pot. But there's how many different countries around the world? It's like we forget that there's 200 or so other places around here that those are other pots. And when I think about entrepreneurship, I think about the way to save and actually preserve and grow our economy in our country is to release or unleash our entrepreneurial spirit, like we did back in the Little House on the Prairie times, where we reached out, where we did more exporting, we did more trading, we had more people that were like me, for example, being able to sell a product to someone else in another country, to sell a product to Jeff in Germany, to get that income from Germany to bring back to the US. That's how you grow a pot. That's how you build more income. You can't just circle the same dollar in the same room and expect for growth. So with that, I just, I yield to the thought of overall growth and expanding the pot and having people in place that understand that. And I love hearing that you have an economic background, because one of the posts that I see a lot online is that they can't budget, they can't balance the budget, but they all are billionaires. And it's like, people are like, well, how is that possible? But it's, somebody has the right thoughts, but they're not spreading it amongst the people.
They can balance their budget. They can't balance the overall budget. And
it's the will.
I will say I had lunch. Me and my middle stepson had lunch with a friend of mine, Dominic, here in Richmond a couple weeks ago. And one of the things that Dominic said, and like Markel and Jeff said before you came on, Mike, sometimes you have to have a conversation with different people to see the different perspectives. And the one thing Dominic told me was that the reason why the federal government is so big is because churches and nonprofits don't do their share. And that kind of grabbed me by the neck. And I was like, you know what? He's probably right, that if the community did more, we wouldn't rely so much on the government policing the situations that we're in, as both you said, Mike, and Jeff has discussed. Did you have any
I
final
think
thoughts for us, Mike, before we signed off?
yes, and this is a good topic on which to sign off. Markel, I love your analogy of getting another glass. The problem is the government keeps taking one of our glasses, right? We need we need to be left the hell alone. Government does not grow an economy. The best environment for growing your economy is the one with the lightest government touch possible. So what we want is for the government to get out of our face, not only with regard to taxation, but with regard to the regulatory environment that it creates and the rules that it makes. Economic growth comes from the combination of investment and capital with labor, right? Investing capital with labor. That's where it comes. That's what entrepreneurialism is all about. That's what you're doing, what you guys are doing. Your work as an entrepreneur is what drives economic growth. That's where it comes. It does not come from anything that the government can do. The government can only get in the way of it. And I love your thought about, not just a little house on the prairie, but your own business and of course, all businesses in the United States reaching out past their own communities, past their own states, and in many cases, past their own national borders. This is where a lot of growth comes from. But it's not merely growing your own particular market. It's finding new ways of doing things, bringing new technologies, doing things better, smarter, faster with different people, introducing new products to old markets and old products to new markets. All of this is where economic growth comes from. These are where the new glasses come from. They come from the development of our economy by that combination of capital and labor in new and creative ways. We need the government to stand down and get out of our way. And if we do that, it will, you put your finger right on it, that is the correct phrase, the entrepreneurial spirit will be released in our economy, and it will expand our economy. Too many politicians do the wrong thing with regard to unleashing that, while at the same time saying, well, we'll eventually be able to pay for all this government spending because our economy is going to grow because we're so entrepreneurial. Yeah, that would be true if you would leave us the hell alone, right? But you can't have it both ways. You can't say you believe in an entrepreneurial spirit and then tax the crap out of us and expect us to pay for the government boondoggle. Government is actually growing relative to our economy instead of shrinking relative to our economy. And that is weird considering our economy is growing. And we need to shut that down.
Okay, well, I'm going to say this. I'm happy we had this discussion. Mike, you've helped us make history because this is the first Zoom call Talks Over Drinks episode. And we are also now being able to say that we've had a candidate for president on Talks Over Drinks. We have Jeff joining us from Germany. So it's a lot of firsts today. Mike, if folks want to get in touch with your campaign, how would they find you?
Well, thanks. Here's a guy with two thumbs who's really glad to be on your show. Okay.
Yes,
so
sir.
I'm really happy to have been part of all those firsts. And you've got an international panel now. So that's exciting, even though the rest of us are in Virginia. Look, there's two things that you can do to get a hold of our campaign. One is to go to MikeTermaat.com. That's a little tricky to spell because there's two A's in Ter Maat. But you can go to MikeTermaat.com. You'll find my contact information there. Reach out to me personally if you want to. The other way is to go to a website that's easier to spell. Go to goldnewdeal.org. Gold New Deal is the name of our platform. Our platform has its own URL, its own website. And this is because we're poking a little bit of fun at FDR's New Deal. We believe that we need to roll all of that back and fundamentally change the relationship between us and government. So you can go to goldnewdeal.org. It's easier to spell, read about our platform, and then you can flip into the campaign website. You'll see my email address is there and my phone number. Reach out to me. Let me know what's going on. If you want to play a role in the campaign, you can do that. People that feel like making a contribution to the campaign, they can do that. But you can learn a lot about libertarianism and see what our ideas are and how we're going to disrupt the Republican and Democratic duopoly this year.
Copy that. Well, just
Thank you
stand
for
by
coming.
with us one more moment.
Thank
Jeff, if folks want to catch you, I know you have a Substack account and it is very interesting reading. Can you give us that Substack account so folks can read?
Oh, shoot.
And if you don't have it, that's fine. When we edit, we'll get Markel a splash
put it,
underneath the screen. We'll find you. It's all good.
and people can reach me on Facebook too.
Facebook at Jeff Kleb. Markel, any last words, sir?
Well, you can reach me on all social media platforms, Markel Primes, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, wherever I can be found, you can find me. If you're interested in learning about entrepreneurship, starting your own home-based business, with as little out-of-pocket expense as possible, and learning actual skills that is transferable no matter what niche or product or service that you're into, definitely reach out. We are here to help assist the entrepreneurs and everyone who's looking to grow and develop.
Copy that. Well, I'm going to tell you guys that if you want to catch us, talksoverdrinks@gmail.com. We're Talks Over Drinks at everything: Facebook, Fanbase, Twitter, and YouTube. On Instagram, we are talks_over_drinks on IG. So again, my name is Corey Folkinier. As always, my partner in justice, the God Markel Primes, my brother of another color over in Germany, Jeff Kleb. And we have been speaking with Libertarian presidential hopeful Mike Ter Maat. Mike, thank you again for being with us. And to our fans and followers, remember, it's never too early or too late for Talks Over Drinks. Cheers.
All right, let's talk over drink.
Talks over drinks, talks over drinks. We can have a conversation. You can say what you think. I'm 40 plus and still rocking to this hip hop beat. Bring it live and direct right here from Broad Street. I pray that my lyrics do find you well, cause it's me, MSB, and a guy named Markel. The White Jason, you know he fan. Invite indie musicians coming straight slam. I got swerving beat sounds on the ones and twos, and together, united, we gon' bring it to you. We the RVA Rap Pack crew. So take your pick, Comcast or YouTube. No disrespect, I don't mean to be rude, but these other talk shows can't do what we do. I stay with the lyrics, some call me Dread Dude. Difference of opinion should not be called sin. Tell the truth, yo Dread, where you been? Invest a few minutes, I hope you tune in, yo. Politics, economics, education. These are topics across the whole entire nation. Keep it 100, we gon' talk about them, yo. Bring your kids, tell your mama and a friend, yo, it's Toast Over Drinks, Toast Over Drinks. We can have a conversation, you can say what you think.
Let's talk over drink. Pull up a chair and let's chill. Let's party, let's talk and let's build. Alright, let's talk over drink. We over here keeping it real, saying exactly how we feel. Come on, let's talk over drink. Pull up a chair and let's chill. Let's party, let's talk and let's build. Alright, let's talk over drink.